Hi everyone, you've tuned into Anime Huddle coming straight from Radio LUMS, and this is your RJ Namrah speaking. We are going to be talking mostly about Japanese animation and comics, since the word anime is mostly synonymous with that, but we're going to try to not limit ourselves to that, since there are a lot of great animations out there from all over the world that we can also talk about. We're going to attempt a very ambitious, brief deep dive into said anime of the episode and talk about the themes, issues, or the historical, political, social context behind the animes, which also includes talking about people who were involved in the production, and most importantly, give the spotlight to anime that has had significant impact in the industry. So with all that said, let's go to the anime of our episode today, Tomie. If you're unfamiliar with these series, here's a mini breakdown of it. It's a horror series created by Junji Ito, a very renowned Japanese manga artist whose works have developed this cult-like following over the years. You've probably seen excerpts from his comics, even if you can't place him right now, since he's got this very distinct, macabre aesthetic and art style that's fairly popular in pop culture. The series itself is pretty simple to follow. It revolves around a woman called Tomie, who's quite a mysterious female lead, considering we never really learn much about her other than the surface. But her surface is really what's important here. She's meant to be very beautiful, so much so that whoever meets her is instantly attracted to her, to the point of abnormal obsession, and they end up murdering her. Plot twist is that she doesn't die when she gets killed. She ends up cloning herself and regenerating, spreading more clone Tomies all over. That's pretty much what happens in every story arc. But something that makes Tomie a little difficult to understand is that there's no proper chronological order, nor did Junji Ito ever clarify if there was. We don't know when or where Tomie began from, which one was the original, and which Tomie we're even following right now. So every chapter is basically a new story with the same main character who is obviously Tomie. The popularity of Tomie has crossed over from 1987, which is when the first issue was published, to the 21st century, and the central focus of attention is Tomie herself. Because who doesn't love a self-aware, narcissistic character who's so beautiful she drives people insane to the point of murdering her? In pop culture especially, Tomie is very prevalent. This popularity is a bit odd actually, because if you've gone through the series, you're going to see that she's far from likable in any way. She's a huge egomaniac, regularly engages in morally ambiguous behavior, and has a one-dimensional personality that we don't ever see developing. And the central point to her character only seems to be her physical appearance. We're going to go over some of the reasons why her persona is so timeless and constantly gained traction over the years, far from declining in influence as you'd expect an older comic to, and actually recently got an anime developed after it. So firstly, the fixation with Tomie's persona can be linked to essential evil contrasting with beauty, which is the idea of an individual who's essentially evil, but having that evilness contrast with beauty, and it's a very tempting idea, especially as an aesthetic we see transferring into real life too. Often, for example, people who've done questionable things but happen to be conventionally attractive, they tend to be glamorized and put up on a pedestal. That's more of what's happening with Tomie, except the clear line between fiction and reality in this case leads people to openly anticipate what Tomie does next as a paragon of evil and vanity. She will do anything to be at the top of the hierarchy, like how she falsely accused an old woman who took her in of abuse so that she could take over her fortune in the chapter Orphan Girl, and constantly switches her personality in order to accommodate that. First, she commonly shows herself as a sweet, innocent, pretty young woman who is totally harmless and often in need of some help. And once she gets that help and has won her helpers over, Her personality does a complete switch to what's assumedly her real nature, someone who's very cruel and unappreciative of whatever anyone does for her, and always leaves in the end. And we can see this in another aspect of her persona as a ruthless femme fatale. Traditionally speaking, the category for a femme fatale is quite simple. She has it all: beauty, intelligence, but most of all, control. She knows what she has and how to use it. She's not necessarily meant to be good. She's always ruined in some way or the other, some sort of fatal flaw to her, because she's always the foil to either a female lead who is less threatening to the idea of what a woman can be, or to male characters who she's not meant to outshine. Adding to that, there is also the glamour of what's called dark feminine energy. You've probably heard of this term even if you don't really understand what it means, most likely from platforms like Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. This idea simply refers to a woman who is dominant, assertive, and lets out the deepest sides of her, but speaking in social media terms, since that's the popular interpretation, dark feminine energy has kind of been butchered into focusing on the physical aspects only. You are again put into this box of what makes a woman desirable, or how she can become desirable. The poster girls for this movement include celebrities like Bella Hadid and Megan Fox, but alongside that, you're often going to see Tomie's face, or you're going to have discourse surrounding Tomie corresponding with this idea of dark feminine energy, even if they don't use the term. I think that's a large part of what makes Tomie's persona so fascinating, especially as a femme fatale, because firstly, even though we can't say that much about her as a multi-dimensional character, for example, perhaps that's the point. Her personality is one-dimensional and never develops, because she's constantly showing her true self, the part of that most of us hide, as women especially, and is unapologetic about that to an extreme. And going back to the symbol of beauty, that also tends to coincide with the construction of Tomie as a ruthless femme fatale, and it's the focus for why she's such an attractive character to people. She takes what she wants, isn't sorry about what she leaves behind, never changes her personality, or has any empathy for anyone other than herself. But add on to all these things that are meant to be flaws with the guise of beauty, that ends up triumphing over all, and it's the reason why Tomie always wins in the end. Physical appearance is the main reason for attraction too. How Tomie is able to manipulate and cause so many characters, many of whom were initially portrayed as honorable or admirable, to fall from grace and to absolute ruin through her beauty, and is completely passive in the sense that she does not use anything other than her words and her appearance to make people listen to her and drive them mad. So a lot of people who have a surface understanding of the series, they tend to view her really positively and sympathetically in the context of her only being a sufferer of the victim-blaming trope of this is what she deserves, regarding the violence that many characters put her through. But this is where people started misinterpreting the complexity of Tomie herself and what Junji Ito has actually represented her as. So, going on to the misinterpretations of her character, firstly, she is a victim, you know. No one actually deserves to be hacked up into little pieces for acting like a mean girl. But she's not your traditional victim, and she's not completely morally in the right either. And the people who say she is miss the entire point of Tomie. For example, for a normal character, you would find death or murder to be the worst possible ending, and something that readers would also be pretty cut up about. But that's not what's happening with Tomie. When Tomie is killed, she's actually winning in the broad sense of what's going on. By being cut up into little pieces, she gets to make more clones of herself. And so there's more Tomies to move on to their next target. So I personally don't get this is what she deserves sentiment attached to her. What I instead get is a and the cycle continues sentiment instead. Another thing that's pretty dangerous about the assumption that Tomie is a complete victim or a product of the society around her is that it completely denies her own agency. Facts are that we don't know much about who Tomie is, we only know what Tomie does. And something people gloss over when they follow this victim narrative is that while Tomie may be a product of the society she's part of, she's also definitely driving and making the continuation of the society possible. The most disturbing example I found of this was in the chapter The Boy, in which she used a young child for her own personal gain and groomed them to become emotionally dependent on her. In a way, she's a victim and a perpetrator. Those things aren't mutually exclusive after all. She manipulates people to do their worst, but ends up physically hurt in the end. Something that's really central to the dilemma of Tomie is the inability to pinpoint who is the exact culprit and who is the one in the total wrong, Tomie or the people who hurt her, or is this just fancy social commentary on the author's part? Adding on to that, while we can keep arguing amongst ourselves about what Tomie is meant to represent, it's interesting to look at what Junji Ito was thinking when he created her, because it's not what you'd expect. Firstly, his inspiration wasn't a woman or someone extraordinarily beautiful at all, but an incident that occurred when Ito was in high school, in which a boy in his class passed away in an accident, was the inspiration. Ito had a tough time accepting his death and always felt like his classmate would suddenly pop up again out of nowhere. And so the key thing that Ito wanted to portray in Tomie was the expression of someone who had died but innocently shows up again as if nothing happened. So, the power of immortality. This is something Ito brings up as the main reason for why he thought Tomie was so fascinating to his female audience. Her immortality and her freedom to live her life the way she wishes. But we need to be a little careful about labeling Tomie as a feminist or having themes of women empowerment within it. Because number one, Ito himself has never called Tomie that. Number two, Ito's own views of women are a bit problematic, in the sense that he's openly admitted to being afraid of them, and we see a similar thought process with Tomie as well, because he had once stated that he created Tomie to overcome this fear, and further said, quote, "I strongly believe that the most attractive things are often the most fatal, and this is often the case in my horror manga work. Tomie is the best example of this fatal attraction," unquote. Also, obsession and powerlessness, as we see with how people become infatuated with Tomie and how powerless she is in the end to stop them from killing her, is a common theme in Junji Ito's works, like Uzumaki, which was about the obsession with the shape of a spiral and the constant tragedies that followed as a result. In Tomie, this obsession seems to be translated as male anxieties towards women. In this case, the desire to possess Tomie, who does not want to be owned. This problem is where the central conflict always begins in every story. So, now that we've talked quite a bit about Tomie, we have to talk about what makes her so special that she continues to be attractive as a character and as a symbol till this day. Generally, she has done a lot to deconstruct the myth of women. Her not being a traditional victim or someone you find it hard to feel pity for makes her really novel and charismatic even in the 21st century. Her deconstruction of the myth of women through challenging typical ideas of what a female character should be like is something you still don't see represented much these days. And especially regarding what women should be like, she deconstructs traditional ideas of what makes a woman desirable and what women themselves should desire. Tomie is a story that takes the conventional femme fatale storyline and takes it to an extreme where men, instead of befalling ruin or committing bad actions for the sake of beautiful women, become more violent towards Tomie herself, which only benefits her, because through how she brings up the worst in people, she becomes stronger in a way, and is only able to multiply into clones as a result of that. Tomie is also shown to be a total monster, personality-wise, in which she enjoys breaking people, and physically as well, with there being a hidden ugly side to her appearance if you try to capture it, like in photos or in paintings. And going back to her as a female character, Tomie is really unique for female characters in general, even today. She's not what's typically seen in Japan's cultural industry, for example. She embodies everything that typical cute female character is not, as she's not innocent or nice, nor does she pretend to be. The entire plot of the series kind of reinforces the cycle of Tomie's power, and that there's not really any way to stop her once she's on a rampage. So with that, it's understandable why her popularity went global. And if you look at Western industries as another example, they almost always miss the mark when they try to portray a powerful female character. She's either beautiful and ruthless, but secretly emotionally damaged, until some male character comes along to fix her, or she's meant to be ruined forever. They also tend to show female characters as very strong, but to an extent. She's always going to fall short somehow to a male character, or they're going to depict whatever failures there might be in her life in a really fatalistic way, like that defines her, instead of letting her grow as a person. And Tomie is obviously really different from all of that, because while her problem could be said to be that she has a pretty hard time stopping people from murdering her, at the same time, she's able to continue her cycle even when this happens. And with that, we have to think a little about what most people want to see Tomie as compared to what she really is. Where is the real empowerment in her, since she is a popularized model for female fans? The real empowerment in Tomie is that she was able to successfully deconstruct the patriarchal notion of women, specifically in Japanese society, but we can see this applicable everywhere else too, through challenging the idea of woman as well as the idea of beauty, through Tomie's monster-like abilities and femme fatale characteristics contrasting. Tomie also brings up a very important lesson, which is the obsession with the objectification of women, and Genji Ito shows that in an extreme, so much so that all parties involved, they go through this process of degradation. So, getting closer to the end of our dilemma with Tomie, I think that we can all agree that even though Tomie is meant to be the monster, the people who are around her, the ones shown to be her victims, are actually the ones taking truly horrific actions. Throughout the series, Genji Ito showed that men want her and women want to be her. But be realistic for a second. Why would you want Tomie, or why would you even want to be her? The dilemma of that, the attractiveness of it, is why her persona is so timeless till this day. And so, with that, we've reached the end of this episode. Thank you for tuning into Anime Huddle so far. This was your RJ Namrah. Do look forward to the next episode, and goodbye.